The Galactic Council chamber was built inside a hollow moon. Stars burned outside the massive glass walls, and hundreds of alien leaders sat in silence as a red hologram filled the center of the room. The symbol of the Zorvath Empire glowed like fire. Supreme Warlord Koresh stepped forward. He was tall, armored in black metal, his yellow eyes cold and proud. His voice echoed across the chamber. Human expansion ends today. The Zorvath Empire declares total war on humanity. A wave of whispers spread through the council. Some leaders looked shocked. Some looked afraid. A few lowered their heads. Because humans were not unknown. They were new compared to the older empires. Their colonies were still growing. Their fleets were smaller. But humans had something that made older races uncomfortable. They adapted fast. Too fast. One of the elder species, a silver-skinned diplomat from the Valeri Combine, slowly stood. "This is a mistake," she said calmly. "Humans are not what they appear." Koresh laughed. "They are divided. Emotional. Weak. Their worlds are soft. Their people argue among themselves. They will fall quickly." He raised his clawed hand. "The Zorvath fleets are already moving." And far away, in the Sol system, alarms began to ring. The message from the council reached Earth within seconds. On the surface, people continued walking through cities. Ships moved in orbit. News channels reported the declaration calmly. There was no panic. No screaming. No riots. Instead, something quieter happened. Military networks activated across every human colony. Hidden shipyards powered on. Defense platforms that had been silent for years came online. Admiral Daniel Reyes stood on the bridge of the Terran flagship Resolute Dawn. The massive ship floated above Mars, its hull shining under distant sunlight. He watched the tactical display without emotion. Thousands of red signals appeared at the edge of human space. The Zorvath fleet. "Confirmation?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Multiple strike groups entering outer defense range." Reyes nodded slowly. "Send the message." Across open space, a transmission reached the leading Zorvath ships. Reyes' face appeared on their command screens. "You still have time to stand down," he said in a steady voice. "Turn back now. We do not want this war." Inside the Zorvath command carrier, officers hissed in anger. Koresh himself appeared on the screen. "Prepare to be erased, human." The transmission ended. Seconds later, the first Zorvath cannons fired. Bright beams cut across space, striking the outer defense stations near Pluto. Explosions flashed like newborn stars. The war had begun. But something unexpected happened. The destroyed stations had been empty. Decoys. As the Zorvath fleet pushed deeper into human territory, their scanners began to flicker. Signals bounced strangely. Coordinates shifted. "Navigation error," one Zorvath officer reported. Then the first cruiser vanished. Not destroyed. Gone. Its signal disappeared from every system at once. Before panic could spread, 3 more ships twisted violently, crushed as if invisible hands squeezed them. Human defense satellites revealed themselves. Gravitational weapons bent space around the invading fleet. Ships collided with warped reality itself. Confusion exploded across Zorvath channels. "This is impossible. They should not have this technology." On the Resolute Dawn, Reyes watched silently. "Phase 1 active," a human officer reported. Reyes gave a small nod. "For decades, we prepared," he said quietly. Human history was filled with war. Pain. Loss. Near extinction more than once. They had learned one lesson clearly. Never assume peace will last forever. As more Zorvath ships entered the system, hidden minefields activated. Thousands of microdrones swarmed like metal insects, tearing through shields. The once proud Zorvath formation began to break apart. And deep in the council chamber, news started to arrive. The invaders were losing. Fast. The leaders who had stayed silent now understood. The warning had not been a threat. It had been mercy. Back at the front lines, Reyes looked at the tactical map. The enemy had crossed the final boundary marker into restricted space. He took a slow breath. They fired first, he said calmly. Now we respond. Behind him, hundreds of human warships powered forward. The stars themselves seemed to shake. The Zorvath had declared war on humans. And on the very first day, they realized something terrifying. Humanity had been waiting. The Zorvath fleet had entered human space with pride. Now they moved with fear. Broken ships drifted in silence. Distress signals filled every channel. Commanders shouted orders that no longer made sense. Their perfect battle formation was gone. But the Zorvath were not cowards. They regrouped. Supreme Warlord Koresh stood inside his war carrier, watching the tactical display flicker. Nearly 20% of his forward fleet was already destroyed. Stabilize formation, he ordered. Advance at full power. Overwhelm their defenses. Thousands of engines flared brighter. The fleet pushed deeper toward Mars and the inner colonies. That was their next mistake. They believed the first trap was the only trap. They were wrong. Suddenly, space ahead of them shimmered like water. Long-range scanners showed empty space. But visual sensors showed distortion. Before the Zorvath could react, a massive wave rolled through their fleet. It was not energy. It was not plasma. It was gravity. Human engineers had turned space itself into a weapon. Entire sections of the void compressed violently. Battleships folded inward. Cruisers bent and snapped like fragile metal toys. Smaller ships were crushed into debris within seconds. The Zorvath weapons fired wildly into the distortion. Their beams curved away uselessly. Inside the Terran flagship Resolute Dawn, Admiral Reyes remained calm. Gravity nets holding, an officer reported. Enemy losing cohesion. Reyes nodded once. Release the second layer. At once, thousands of dark objects powered on. They had been drifting silently for years, hidden between asteroids and debris fields. Stealth platforms. Each one launched precise kinetic strikes at enemy engines and command towers. Human targeting systems were exact. They did not waste fire. They disabled leadership first. The Zorvath fleet began to fracture without coordination. "Where is our support fleet?" one alien captain shouted over comms. "There is no support fleet," another replied in horror. "They are blocking our reinforcements." Far behind the main battle, human strike groups had appeared through short-range jump corridors. They were not attacking directly. They were cutting supply lines. Fuel ships exploded. Ammunition carriers went dark. Communication relays were destroyed in seconds. The Zorvath were not just under attack. They were isolated. On Earth, the public finally saw live footage from the battle. News networks showed massive alien ships twisting under invisible pressure. But there was no celebration. Only silence. Because humans understood the cost of war. Back on the battlefield, Koresh slammed his clawed hand against his command console. "These weapons were never reported in our intelligence." A trembling officer replied, "Humans must have developed them in secret." Koresh's eyes burned with anger. "Push forward. Reach Mars. Break their morale." The remaining Zorvath battleships formed a spearhead and charged directly toward the inner defense ring. For a brief moment, it looked like they might break through. Then something even worse happened. The stars behind them flashed. Human ships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. Not dozens. Not hundreds. Thousands. The full Terran fleet had arrived. Sleek black hulls reflected distant starlight. Rail cannons rotated into firing position. Carrier bays opened, releasing waves of strike fighters. The humans had allowed the Zorvath to move deep enough to trap themselves. Admiral Reyes spoke over fleet-wide comms. Engage. The void exploded. Human railguns fired solid metal rounds at near light speed. Each impact tore through shields like paper. Coordinated missile swarms targeted engines and weapon arrays with brutal precision. Zorvath ships tried to retreat. But retreat paths were gone. Gravity distortions blocked escape vectors. Minefields activated behind them. One by one, proud alien warships were disabled or destroyed. The void itself felt hostile. As if human space rejected invaders. Within hours, the first Zorvath invasion wave was shattered. More than half their fleet was gone. And they had not even reached Mars. On the Resolute Dawn, Reyes watched the enemy's broken formation scatter. Send them another message, he said quietly. A transmission opened to every surviving Zorvath vessel. You crossed into our space, Reyes said calmly. You fired first. You ignored the warning. His eyes were steady. This is only the beginning. Across the battlefield, Zorvath commanders felt something new. Not anger. Not pride. Fear. Because they finally understood the truth. They had not entered empty territory. They had entered a fortress built by a species that survived its own destruction many times. And the void itself was fighting back. The war was far from over. But for the first time since declaring it, the Zorvath Empire realized they might not win. The galaxy expected humans to defend. No one expected them to invade. After the first invasion wave was crushed, surviving Zorvath ships limped back toward their border. Emergency signals flooded their command networks. Damage reports showed heavy losses. Entire divisions had vanished. Supreme Warlord Koresh believed the worst was over. He was wrong. In the silent darkness between stars, something moved. Human long-range strike fleets had already entered Zorvath territory. Not loudly. Not in massive numbers. Quietly. Precisely. Admiral Reyes stood inside the war room of the Resolute Dawn. A hologram of the Zorvath Empire rotated slowly in front of him. Begin counteroffensive, he ordered. Across multiple systems, human fleets jumped into position at the exact same second. Shipyards exploded first. Massive construction docks that build Zorvath warships were hit by coordinated railgun strikes. Power cores collapsed. Half-built carriers broke apart in orbit. Next came fuel depots. Human stealth cruisers fired high-velocity rounds into storage stations. Firestorms spread across docking platforms. Then communication hubs went dark. Zorvath command networks collapsed system by system. The attack was not wild. It was surgical. Inside the Zorvath capital system, alarms screamed as emergency alerts flooded every screen. They are inside our territory. How did they cross the border so fast? No fleet detected them. Human ships used new jump calculations, micro-warp corridors that avoided known travel lanes. They appeared where scanners never looked. Koresh gripped the edge of his command throne. Send the second Grand Armada, he roared. From deep space docks, the Zorvath main fleet powered up. This was their true strength. Larger. Heavier. More experienced. Thousands of warships formed defensive lines around the capital world. For the first time, humans faced the full power of the Empire. Admiral Reyes studied the enemy formation. They are protecting their home, an officer said. Reyes nodded slowly. So would we. The human fleet did not rush blindly. Instead, they split into smaller groups. Strike wings attacked from multiple angles, targeting shield relays and defensive satellites. Zorvath cannons fired in massive waves. Explosions lit the darkness. Human ships were hit. Some were destroyed. This was no longer one-sided. It was war. Fighter squadrons clashed between capital ships. Missiles streaked like burning comets. Railguns punched through armor with violent force. But the difference was coordination. Human ships moved like a single mind. When one vessel took heavy damage, two others covered it instantly. When Zorvath ships focused fire, human fleets shifted formation smoothly. They adapted in real time. Inside the Zorvath command center, confusion spread. They change tactics every minute. They are predicting our moves. Human artificial intelligence systems analyzed enemy patterns faster than organic commanders could react. Koresh watched as sections of his defense line began to weaken. Focus fire on their flagship, he ordered. Several Zorvath dreadnoughts locked onto the Resolute Dawn. Massive energy beams fired together. On the human flagship, warning lights flashed red. Shields absorbed the first impacts, then flickered dangerously. Shields at 60%, an officer reported. Reyes remained steady. Deploy mirror swarm. From hidden bays, hundreds of reflective drones launched outward. They spread in a wide arc between enemy cannons and the flagship. The next volley fired. Energy beams struck the drone field and scattered wildly, refracted in unexpected directions. Several Zorvath ships were hit by their own reflected fire. Shock rippled through their ranks. Humans did not just fight harder. They fought smarter. As the battle continued, human boarding units launched toward isolated Zorvath cruisers. Instead of destroying every ship, they captured command bridges and forced surrender. On civilian channels across the galaxy, footage spread quickly. Humans were not burning cities. They were dismantling military power. Carefully. Deliberately. After hours of fighting, the Second Grand Armada began to fall back toward the capital planet. They had expected fear. They found resistance. They expected defense. They received invasion. Admiral Reyes looked at the shrinking enemy formation. Send a direct transmission to Koresh. The screen flickered. The Zorvath warlord appeared, his expression furious but shaken. Reyes spoke calmly. You can still end this. Stand down. Koresh's silence lasted several seconds. Behind him, smoke filled parts of his command deck. You crossed into our territory, Koresh growled. Reyes' voice did not change. You crossed ours first. The transmission ended. As the human fleet tightened its formation around the capital system, a single truth spread across the stars. Humanity had not only survived the invasion. They had crossed the line. And now the war was at the enemy's door. The Zorvath capital world had never known fear. For centuries, it had been untouchable. Protected by massive orbital rings, layered shield arrays, and the largest fleet in their history, it was a symbol of absolute power. Now human warships surrounded it. Not in chaos. Not recklessly. In perfect formation. Supreme Warlord Koresh stood inside the central command tower overlooking his planet. The sky above was filled with defensive satellites and warships preparing for the final stand. Below, millions of civilians waited in silence. For the first time, Koresh understood something terrible. This war had come home. Across orbit, the Terran fleet shifted into position. Human carriers released squadrons of strike craft, but they did not dive toward the planet. They focused only on military targets. Admiral Reyes watched the capital through the main display. Confirm civilian zones, he ordered. Confirmed. No fire authorized on population centers, his officer replied. Reyes nodded. Begin orbital suppression. Human rail cannons fired in synchronized waves. Kinetic rounds smashed into shield generators on the orbital defense ring. Explosions rippled across metal structures the size of cities. Zorveth cannons returned fire. The space between fleets became a storm of energy and debris. Human ships were hit hard this time. Several cruisers lost shields and drifted away damaged. Medical transports moved quickly to rescue survivors. The battle was brutal. But humans did not break formation. They adapted. When Zorveth battleships tried to flank from the eastern defense line, human destroyers rotated instantly to intercept. When heavy cannons targeted carriers, stealth frigates slipped behind enemy positions and destroyed targeting arrays. The Empire's greatest strength, its massive numbers, became a weakness. Too many ships. Too little coordination. Inside the Zorveth command center, panic spread among officers. Our shield grid is collapsing. Outer ring lost. Communications disrupted in 3 sectors. Koresh felt anger rise inside him. We are the Zorveth Empire, he roared. We do not fall. But his voice sounded less certain than before. On the human flagship, Reyes received new data. Enemy fleet morale dropping. Surrender signals detected from isolated groups. Reyes stared at the display. Accept surrender from military units only. Continue disabling primary command ships. The difference between the two sides was now clear. The Zorveth fought with pride. Humans fought with purpose. Hours passed. One by one, the orbital defense platforms went dark. Zorveth supply lines within their own system collapsed as human strike teams captured logistics stations. Even now, humans avoided planetary bombardment. Instead, they choked the Empire's ability to fight. On the surface, Zorveth civilians watched human ships on their skies. Fear spread, but confusion followed quickly. The humans were not attacking cities. They were not striking hospitals. They were not destroying infrastructure. They were removing weapons. Back in orbit, Koresh launched his final move. All remaining ships, full assault on their flagship, he commanded. The remaining loyal fleet formed a desperate spear and charged directly at the Resolute Dawn. Human sensors detected the charge instantly. Reyes did not hesitate. Open corridor. Human ships parted slightly, forming a narrow gap in their formation. The Zorveth fleet rushed forward, believing they had broken through. They flew straight into the center. That was the trap. Hidden mines activated behind them, sealing the escape route. Human battleships closed the gap from all sides. The Zorveth spear was surrounded. Railguns fired at point-blank range. Engines shattered. Weapons systems failed. Within 12 minutes, the final loyal fleet was disabled. Koresh watched his tactical map go dark sector by sector. Silence filled his command tower. He had declared this war with confidence. Now his empire was collapsing around him. A final transmission appeared on his main screen. Admiral Reyes. This ends now, Reyes said calmly. Stand down your remaining forces. We will not harm your civilians. But your war is over. Koresh looked out at the sky filled with human ships. For the first time in his life, he saw defeat. Slowly, he lowered his head. Across the system, Zorveth weapons powered down. The empire that had once declared humanity weak had been dismantled in days. Not erased. Not destroyed. Broken. And in the silent space above the capital world, one truth became clear. They had declared war on humans. And their empire would never be the same again. The war ended not with a final explosion, but with silence. Above the Zorveth capital, thousands of human ships held position. Their weapons were still active, but they did not fire. The once proud Zorveth fleet drifted powerless, engines offline, shields down. Across the system, surrender codes echoed through space. Supreme Warlord Koresh stood alone in his command tower as human boarding vessels locked onto his flagship. He could have chosen self-destruction. Many warlords before him would have. But something had changed. He had seen how humans fought. They were not monsters. They were not conquerors. They were something far more dangerous. They were disciplined. Human marines entered the tower in controlled formation. Weapons raised. Movements precise. Koresh did not resist. "I will answer for this war," he said quietly. Far above the planet, Admiral Reyes watched the surrender unfold. "Secure military assets only," he ordered. "No civilian interference." Within hours, Zorvath weapons factories were shut down. Fleet command codes were transferred. Warship production halted completely. But cities remained untouched. Power grids stayed active. Hospitals continued running. The galaxy watched in disbelief. Across countless systems, news networks replayed the battle footage. The moment the Empire fell. The moment the war ended. And the moment humanity chose restraint. In the Galactic Council chamber, leaders gathered again beneath the floating stars. The mood was very different from the day war was declared. No pride. No arrogance. Only reflection. Admiral Reyes appeared by hologram in the center of the chamber. The same place where Koresh had once declared humanity weak. Reyes stood calm, hands behind his back. "This war was not started by us," he said. His voice was steady, clear across every system. "We offered warning. We offered peace. It was ignored." Images of destroyed human stations appeared briefly. Then images of captured Zorvath fleets. "We defended our people. Then we ended the threat." He paused. "We do not seek territory. We do not seek revenge. We seek stability. Let this be the final lesson." Silence filled the chamber. Even the oldest empires understood now. Humans were not reckless. They were patient. They did not show their strength unless forced. But once forced, they revealed everything. Back on Earth, people gathered quietly in cities. There were no wild celebrations. No screams of victory. Only relief. Families welcomed back soldiers. Medical ships returned with survivors. Rebuilding began immediately. Because humans understood something deeply. Winning a war still meant loss. On the Zorvath homeworld, Koresh stood before his people and announced the surrender personally. There was no hiding it. "We misjudged them," he admitted. For an empire built on dominance, those words were historic. Human advisors worked alongside Zorvath engineers to dismantle weapon platforms safely. Trade lanes slowly reopened. Neutral observers monitored the demilitarization process. The galaxy shifted. From that day forward, no empire casually threatened Earth. No fleet crossed into human territory without permission. No leader spoke of humans as weak. They had seen what happened. They had seen how quickly the Terran fleet responded. How precisely they fought. How carefully they ended it. Weeks later, a final message was broadcast from Earth to every major civilization. It was simple. "We prefer peace. But if war is chosen, we will finish it." Those words were recorded in history archives across the galaxy. And long after ships were repaired and fleets rebuilt, one truth remained carved into the memory of every empire. They declared war on humans. It was their final mistake. Because humanity did not rise in anger. Humanity rose in resolve. And when the stars themselves bore witness to that resolve, the galaxy finally understood who they had challenged.